Well, hello, welcome to another episode of Desert Island Drams on Whisky and Cynicism. Part of the idea behind this series of Desert Island Drams is not just to do the usual thing of getting industry people, bartenders, and kind of bar owners, brand ambassadors involved, but also consumers of the industry, because I think it's very easy for us in the whiskey industry and the drinks industry at large to forget that there is a consumer at the end of the day, and that's kind of the overall recipient of any of what we do, be it content like this or the liquid itself. So to that end, I'd like to welcome a very good friend of mine, Luke Skipper, who's along. Luke was a regular of mine at The Last Word when I used to run it. Has since become a good mate and kind of brother in arms when it comes to whiskey and cocktails. So Luke, welcome. And what have you got there? What are you drinking?
Hey, buddy. Yeah, I'm drinking a whiskey highball with some Hoshizaki ice. It's Suntory's vintage Suntory old whiskey, which I picked up at an auction. So nice, refreshing for a Friday afternoon.
Very nice. To get a little bit of context, Luke and I have both overindulged in auctions during lockdown, so that might be a slightly recurring theme of this. I'm drinking an old-fashioned, actually, because it's my Friday too. So I think, firstly, as a consumer of whiskey and the drinks industry in general, we in the industry look at marketing and marketing employees and kind of sometimes scoff and sometimes laud stuff, and again, maybe forget that it's not necessarily directed at us. As someone who, I guess, is the intended recipient of marketing campaigns and advertising campaigns and any sort of branding that goes on, what do you find the most annoying or tiresome of the kind of tropes in whiskey marketing?
I guess a couple of things that are related, directly related. Well, and also the term expressions is something that I just find weird, but non-age defined expressions is something that probably irrationally annoys me. And it's not to say, definitely not to say that there's lots of amazing whiskey that of course doesn't have an age definition on it. But I just think some of the marketing around the expressions are just like, it's not about the whiskey, it's something like, Storm or, I don't know, Orcs and Wizards and, different like limited edition bottlings. That's just totally divorced from the actual product itself. And I guess it just speaks to me that like, it's not focusing on the liquid. It's like some sort of, backstory or a traditional marketing gimmick. And I guess the second thing for me that's related to that, and I have some sympathy for it, but like, it's the really strained and tenuous backstory to like new distilleries and, people who are starting up. And I get why they need to have a bit of, cachet and a bit of history, but really it's not focusing on the liquid itself. And it's just kind of like, you can just see through it. It's not about what they're trying to do in the future. It's all about sort of this concocted or exaggerated backstory. And it's not just about what they want to do as a distillery. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so I think it's something that we kind of touch on every so often as well, as that contrived provenance, which, is slightly kind of annoying and repetitive. And I think the non-age statement thing you're talking about is when you get these huge ranges of linked bottles that become more of a collecting point than actually wanting to drink different expressions or different ages or different kind of styles from the same distillery. It's more or less having all the cards in the deck. Is that kind of fair?
You said it much more eloquently than me. It's exactly that. It's kind of this collectability angle, and there probably is a bit of like, we didn't plan properly, or whiskey's become very popular. We need to sell spirit, and we've rinsed some pretty young stuff through a heavy finishing cask and slapped a weird name on it. And I can understand that from a business perspective, but it just is quite transparent to me.
Yeah, we're not going to have a 15-year-old anytime soon, so let's put a random name on it and hope for the best, that kind of angle.
Yeah, and make it collectible by doing something weird and zany to it. I don't know. It just seems really, really quite forced.
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think there is that, but I think any distillery or brand that pushes it too far, it dilutes the brand much, and you'll find that the industry and the consumer eventually sees past that. A couple of cool releases maybe, but when you're on your 12th that year, I think it's almost a self-defeating situation.
Yeah, exactly. Like if your 12-year-old or your 10-year-old isn't carrying the weight, then people will eventually see through that, I think.
Absolutely. we're both trying very hard not to mention distilleries here, but I think it's really quite obvious who we are talking about, and that kind of strained provenance, you're saying strained marketing, is something that we're seeing more and more of, the lack of age statements, but I think it's going to disappear on its own because of people like you who go, well, the first one was cool, but the 15th really isn't.
Yeah. And I mean, if you want to develop a customer that is a customer for life, and what you're primarily pushing is very limited release stuff, then that's quite difficult too. You want to be able to know that the 12 that you had and loved 10 years ago is going to be kind of similar to what it is now, right? That's just brand loyalty.
Absolutely. And financially, if you're releasing 16 different limited editions a year, that customer for life normally simply can't afford to dedicate their entire whiskey buying budget for 12 months to your distillery.
Yeah, exactly.
So, and kind of moving on from Wicks and to a bit of kind of drinks industry in general. I mean, you're a drinks enthusiast. You make drinks at home. You've got a social media presence that is varied, but part of that is you do post a lot of home cocktails, and you have a bit of a following for it. And when I did everyone's quarantine during the start of lockdown, that was a direct rip off of your COVID cocktail hour. You must have people in your kind of life who aren't even drinks enthusiasts. They might have the odd cocktail when they're out, and they must see you as a bit of a guru and a bit of a kind of a hive of information and stuff for that things. And then you're obviously kind of involved in the industry a bit because you're a regular at the bar, and we discuss about these things. How do you see the difference between your relationship with people who have kind of no interest or no real amateur interest, and then how you see the industry that you kind of are quite familiar with as well?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it started, 4 or 5 years ago. My now wife got me a Savoy cocktail book, and I just started working my way through it. I just really enjoyed making, home of an evening and make a couple of cocktails, and started, posting it, and people, they really liked it. Well, my friends and family. Of course, my profiles are private, so it's not like a public profile. But even then, people were quite interested, and I really enjoyed doing it. I guess some of them really like it because it then inspires them to go and try it themselves. And the majority of the drinks that I make are relatively simple or classics. They don't require a lot of, unique ingredients. And that's the difference for me when I look at a lot of the industry doing that sort of, whether it's posting about drinks or new recipes, that the audience to me seems like it's other industry people. Because there's always a couple of things or one thing in the cocktail that's like, some sort of shrub or unique ingredient that is really hard to find. And the average person is going to look at that and go, yeah, that's really creative. But I mean, I'm never going to make that of a Friday night at home.
Yeah, I don't need 2.5 liters of marshmallow syrup in the flat.
Yeah, and it's like, I get it, and I understand that people are, that are in the industry are pushing and they're trying new things. But so much of that content is really like, it's inward looking to me. It's not like, hey, you want to make cocktails at home that aren't gin and tonics? Like, here's some things you can do. And that's actually like would push sales, I would think, more than, distill this nettleweed and, a kettle. I mean, people look at that and go like, that's great. And that's why I go to a really nice cocktail bar to try really cool things like that. But 90% of the time I'm looking for something that's a lot more simple to make. Yeah,
I think with a lot of the content we see online there's a danger of becoming very backslapping and high-fiving kind of industry stuff, industry for industry. And also, I think there's a lot of stuff that, people share a video because they want the cultural cachet of being associated with whoever posted it in the first place. And I think a lot of these videos end up with more shares than likes. And I'm very aware that what I'm saying, that gun can be pointed back at me very quickly on this site. But I think it's more promotion for promotion's sake rather than the content really having a receiver, which is what we're talking about with earlier, about that the consumer needs to be the ultimate receiver for it to really have a point a lot of the time.
Yeah, and the way that I describe drinks is quite blunt and, to the point, whereas a lot of the industry stuff is not that it's indecipherable, it's really quite laden with terms that people might, again, see as quite marketing and like, it's kind of baffling to folks. It's not accessible. And it just seems that like people can differentiate, making a drink at home and having a bit of fun and going to a really nice bar to have a really nice cocktail well made by a professional.
Yeah.
but the market doesn't seem to realize that there's quite a lot of money in both.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's weird when I see it, but I guess it also probably, I'm more likely to follow people that are, in the industry. So maybe my view is a bit skewed of that than like the traditional marketing by the companies themselves. But yeah, it does seem that a lot of it's quite inaccessible.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that you could make an old fashioned in a biscuit tin, stir it with a wooden spoon, use the other end of the wooden spoon as your Hawthorne strainer, and pour it into anything you had nearby.
Exactly, mate. And that's why, like, when you were sort of telling me the history of cocktails and the whole batched cocktail, it's like it's a revolutionary thing when people understand that you can just batch up 10 Manhattans and leave them in the fridge. That's what I like to do. It's just booze. You just get them away.
And in your case, literally in the fridge as you pour them into the water dispenser of the fridge.
My water dispenser on my fridge will never dispense water.
So I think one of the questions we tend to ask people, and this is going to be a slightly different format, but in the industry, we get taken on a lot of brand trips and stuff, and we get kind of experiences laid at our feet. Sometimes we're lucky enough, and I think, and hopefully people always realize that's a privilege and not a right. But for yourself, not necessarily working directly in the industry, but you still have an enthusiasm for whiskey and where it comes from, and also drinks. What's your kind of your favorite drinks moment where your enthusiasm is taking you quite to an amazing place or an amazing situation?
Yeah, for me, it was just my time in Hokkaido in Japan. I was there a few years ago, and I dragged my then quite heavily pregnant wife up to really the home of Nikka, although arguably not the home of whiskey in Japan, but definitely one of the first, if not maybe the second distillery. Made by Masataka Takasura, I think I got that right, who has this wonderful backstory of coming to Scotland to learn and study, and then went there to set up the distillery and married a woman from Scotland. But it was just getting on a train and then getting on a little tiny narrow gauge railway train, going up through, the beautiful hills in the footlands of Hokkaido. The leaves are changing, and then you arrive in this like rinky-dink town that has this beautiful distillery in it, and you go in, and I guess it was for me, it was just that, like, whiskey is about enjoying whiskey with friends, right? And that there's a universality about that, which I think we sometimes forget. And we went in and had a great tour. It's a fantastic distillery. They're still using coal to fire the stills. It's super cool. But there was a room where you could like hold like cutouts of the bottles, and you could like put your head through things. It's just a bit of fun. And I grabbed this giant bottle of like, it was Nikka Clear or something, and like held it up to my mouth like I was drinking an enormous cutout bottle. And there was like a group of middle-aged Japanese guys looking, and they all start laughing. And then when I leave, they're all doing the same thing. And it was just like basically just a bunch of banter about whiskey and people having fun and making a real pilgrimage. I just felt like I was a part of something much, much larger after that experience. And then I went back that evening into Sapporo, and I found this bar online. My wife had was staying in the hotel, so I was like, I'm just gonna nip out, check this place out. And it's a place called the Bow Bar, which is named after the Bow Bar in Edinburgh. And I don't want to get the guy's name right. It's Junya Honma. And I don't know if, some listeners who've been to Japan will get this instantly, but basically there's a lot of bars that are in little office buildings that are, on the 6th or 7th floor. So you get in like a little lift, and it's so weird because you cannot see in the bar until you're in the bar. And it's like you've committed to being in the bar. And I stepped in there, and it was just this low lit, beautiful, long bar. And it was just full of the most exquisite vintage whiskeys. And I sat down, I started talking to the owner, I'm getting a free dessert. We're drinking nice whiskeys. And it was just so interesting to see, it from the Japanese perspective, but also realize that we're all actually quite, we're all the same. I don't know. It's just a really beautiful moment for me. And whiskey kind of brought it all together.
Nice. I think two things about that. Masataka Takasuru, the guy who founded Nikka, for those who maybe aren't huge whiskey nerds or kind of like the romanticism of it, look up his story, because it is an amazing story of the way he and his wife kind of forgo being ostracized by their families, disapproving bosses. It's a real love story that ended up in the kind of the foundation of the Japanese whiskey industry. And if you're a real whiskey nerd, you probably already know that story. If you follow Junya Honma on Instagram, JUNYAHONMA, that's his actual tag. I'll put it in the post with this video as well. He posts some amazing old vintage bottles on the Japanese profile. So if you are a bit of a whiskey geek on Instagram, it's worth following, because he's got an amazing collection of old Italian imports and all the kind of really, really nerdy stuff that we can enjoy. So I think that obviously, lastly, the most important thing while we're all here, Luke, if you were to end up on your desert island, what would be the 3 drams that you would take with you?
Well, you're going to know my number one, because between us, I think we've bought all of the stock that we can, that is known in the known world. And that's, it's Ballantine's vintage 1980s blend. I got it for 16 quid. It just took a punt, and we've shared it amongst friends, and it's incredible. And I guess for me, it's the perfect case in point of the deification of single malt versus the vilification of blends, and how weird and wrong that seems to me, because of course back then, as we've discussed previously, there's all of the good malt went into blends, and you can tell as soon as you sip this, it was their standard blend, and it's just phenomenal. It's just great. So yeah, that's number one. Number 2, back to Nika 12 blend. It's a bit punchy for price, but it's worth every penny. It's just the epitome of the art of Japanese blending. It's beautiful. You can put it in a highball if you want, but it's just super nice to sip and enjoy. And then the last one is a now defunct, no longer in existence distillery that was in Etobicoke, which is in a suburb of Toronto, who those know, Ontario. And it's called McGuinness, and it was Old Canada. I bought it at auction, and it's just a classic Canadian rye, which having grown up there, I was very used to. But this type is just so smooth and sweet. It was just wonderful. It was fantastic, and it was cheap.
Well, I mean, I did mention our fixation with auctions might come back up during this, and unfortunately, you shot the crow a bit there, because I think our monopoly on the Ballantine's 80s blend market might have been somewhat compromised there. But I mean, this isn't a kind of conversation about it being very good for the price. This is actually a conversation about it being generally delicious. I think we own about 4 liters between us now, and as a sipping whiskey, it's got weird old funky stuff that you find in old malts and old kind of closed distilleries, and it's got a real length to it. It's for the low ABV. It's just a gorgeous drink, and yeah, I've got a 1.25 liter bottle up there, and I'm not even sure that's enough.
Yeah, no, I panic when I'm down to like about 1.5 liters, because it's so good. And I don't want to harp on about the blend versus the single, but for me, like, it is, like, that's another thing. It's just, I look at that and I think, like, there's so many amazing blends at incredible value.
Well, we've been doing a lot of blind tasting online since lockdown with us and some other friends, and a lot of blends have come out. A lot of things that have been slipped into tastings for banter as a bit of a let's see how the boys go with this blind. They've almost always come out on top. And I think it's given all of us an appreciation, or a renewed appreciation, for how little money and how little you have to go into this market before you find something very, very good.
Yeah, exactly, and that should be encouraging for people.
I think so, and I think it takes away that exclusivity of whiskey, but also it's just a reminder of always taste blind when you can, and just kind of have no preconceptions, because a lot of things that even we as pretty realistic people might have been a bit snobbish on 4 months ago, we are now fully in favor of.
Yeah, conversion.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, that's been a lot of fun, Luke, and nice to have you on. And I'll probably see you at the next blind Zoom tasting, where we taste some weird old vintage blends.
For sure, man. It was a pleasure. Thanks.
Sounds good. Cheers.
Cheers.